The problem of evil, as we call it, divides into two, really. There's the problem of moral evil, like Auschwitz, the bad things that people do to one another. And then there's the problem of natural evil, tsunamis, earthquakes. I arrived in New Zealand 2 days after the devastating earthquake in Christchurch and spent a whole week facing the press and the cameras, trying to help people come to terms with earthquake why and meeting people that had lost their loved ones. So there's the problem of moral evil and there's the problem of natural evil. Earthquakes on the large scale, brain tumors, cancers on the smaller scale. So there are two sources of the problem. There are also two perspectives on it. Cancer looks very different to a professor of oncology and to a young woman who's just been told that she has 6 months to live. In other words, there's an intellectual perspective. We observe suffering. But there's a pastoral perspective. We suffer. And that's a very different thing. And sometimes we have to fulfill both roles at once. We have to observe our own suffering and try to come to terms with it. And there are two scales of suffering. There's the large scale, the earthquakes, tsunamis, in which thousands of people are wiped out in an instant. But then for the individual, getting a brain tumor appears to be equally significant because it's totally devastating for you. So there are two problems, there are two perspectives, and there are two scales on which we look at it. We've got two halves to our brain. And I've been very interested in reading the work of Ian McGilchrist, who's a leading psychiatrist in Britain. And he points out that in our intellectual societies, we've become very left-brained. We're taking things apart to see how they work. And he reminds us that there's a right-hand side to the brain that puts things together to see what they mean. And there's a sense in which we have to apply both sides of our brain to this particular question. We've got to take things apart. But we've also, and this is the biggest problem of all, tried to integrate things to see if we can make any sense of them. And you know, when I think of these questions, I think of two cathedrals. Coventry Cathedral in England, or Dresden Cathedral, if you like. And you go into them, and you see a bomb has hit them. But you see something else. You see traces of beauty. Christchurch Cathedral, you see an earthquake has hit it, and you can see traces of beauty. The picture that's presented is mixed. I call it barbed wire and beauty. And as we try to investigate this problem, it's really getting to terms with both the beauty and the barbed wire. What story, if any, makes sense of it? Now, our reactions to these things depend on our worldview. That is our general set of answers to the big questions of life. And everybody in this room has a worldview, ranging from the secularist to the theistic, to the pantheistic, to the skeptical. We all have a worldview. And as we come to the deepest question of life, we react according to our worldview. And the reactions are very different. When the earthquake hit, for instance, in New Zealand, some reacted in this way with a famous Hebrew poem, Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. And somehow they held on to their faith in God, using poetry like this. But there are others who are more pantheistic in their thinking and who take the view that those who suffer do so because of their sin in a previous life. And the suffering helps them to work off their karma. Therefore, there's no point in relieving their pain, since that will only serve to prolong the process of purification. And then there were yet other really hardliners who said this earthquake or the tsunami in Japan is the judgment of God. And then others go to the other side and say, look, isn't this the final evidence that there is no God at all? And whenever this topic comes up, we're reminded, as David Hume pointed out long ago, I quote, Epicurus's old questions are yet unanswered. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then is he malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Whence then this evil? Now that's something we're going to return to, but to conclude my initial remarks, I just want to say that I have enormous sympathy with people whose observation of suffering or whose personal experience of it has turned them into atheists. I have many friends in Oxford. They're brilliant people. They're interested in the God question. Some of them are even prepared to say, look, there is evidence of God in the rational intelligibility of the universe, but please don't make it personal. There cannot be any personal God who cares for us. Just look at the mess the world is in. I say I have deep sympathy with people like that. I'll never forget many years ago sitting with two friends from Israel. I just met them, and we were having a discussion, and they discovered to their amazement that I believed in God. And it was husband and wife. They were very brilliant engineers, and they said, look, it's a bit difficult because we don't believe in God. And I said, that's odd, because part of the reason I believe in God is because of your history. Why don't you believe in God? And they said, we'd rather not tell you. And I said, that's okay. They said, we respect people who believe in God, but we just can't, and that's it. But after a few minutes conversation, they changed their minds. And the husband said to me, look, we are going to tell you, but please don't hold us responsible for the consequences. And I said, look, I don't know what's coming, but if my faith in God can't face deep questions, it's not worth believing in. So he said, well, we love literature. And we read to one another as husband and wife, and we were reading a book by Bashevis Singer, the Nobel Prize winner for literature. It's called The Slave. And in that book, there's a horrific account of how in Russia, in one of the pogroms, women and children were buried alive. And I don't know whether it's Singer, I read the book subsequently, but it's dim in my memory, or whether it was these two. They just sat and they said to me, the light went out. The light went out. And we just haven't been able to believe in God since. That resonates with me. I mean, you'd be made of stone if you didn't resonate with that. But it raises questions, and I just want to look at one of the questions it raises. And that is, suppose we go down the route that removes God and says, okay, that's it then. There is no God. That's the end of the story. That raises problems as to where our ideas of evil come from. The Russian novelist Dostoyevsky, I've spent a lot of time in Russia and talked to people about these things. But He once wrote in the book The Brothers Karamazov, Если Бога нет, то и всё позволено. If God does not exist, everything is permissible. What he was saying is not that atheists can't behave morally, of course they can. What he was saying was something much deeper. If there's no God, there is actually no rational basis for morality. Now, it's interesting that in connection with our topic on Monday night, Richard Dawkins says something very, very similar. Listen to his analysis of the bleakness of existence. It goes like this. In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect. If there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. Please notice, no good, no evil. And so I asked the question, were the people you saw up on the screen, were the perpetrators of the Holocaust, were the architects of the killing fields in Cambodia and Rwanda, were Stalin, Hitler, and Mao simply dancing to the music of their DNA? Well, if that's the case, there is no morality. They're not responsible. There's no good. There's no evil. So we might as well just resign ourselves to it without complaint. Now, here's where I find the very odd thing. Richard Dawkins' analysis gets rid of good and evil, and yet he's one of the loudest in talking about the problem of evil. I find that a disconnect. Something very strange is going on at a very deep level. How can you, on the one hand, reject the concept of good and evil and say it doesn't exist, and at the same time be very, very vocal in your condemnation of what you perceive to be the problem of evil? Charles Taylor, the brilliant author of This Secular Age, says this: the modern age, more or less repudiating the idea of a divine lawgiver, has nevertheless tried to retain the ideas of moral right and wrong, not noticing that, in casting God aside, they've also abolished the conditions of meaningfulness for moral right and wrong as well. Educated people do not need to be told, however, that questions such as this have never been answered outside of religion. And it was Friedrich Nietzsche who, perhaps better than anybody else, saw that the consequences of abandoning the transcendent morality that's based on the biblical revelation and which has influenced the West for centuries would lead to a complete devaluation of all moral concepts. He predicted that the death of God would lead to a Darwinian imperative of expressing the will to power. The biblical prohibition, thou shalt not kill, he wrote, is a piece of naivety. Life itself recognizes no solidarity, no equal rights between the healthy and the degenerate parts of an organism. One must excise the latter or the whole will perish. And in a very significant statement, he said this: when one gives up Christian belief, therefore one deprives oneself of the right to Christian morality. Christian morality is a command. Its origin is transcendental. It possesses truth only if God is truth. It stands or falls with belief in God. Nietzsche then asked the question, why morality at all, when life, nature, history are all non-moral? Now, having got rid of God, there has been, for quite a few years now, a tremendous attempt to get some sort of concept of good and evil from within the universe at the level of genetics, of the level of social evolution, and so on and so forth. But some of the attempts are fascinating. Perhaps the most interesting is that of the famous Michael Ruse and E.O. Wilson, where they suggest that ethics is an illusion foisted upon us by our genes to get us to cooperate. So basic ethics, according to them, is unethical, which seems to be to imply a serious contradiction at the very base of things. So what I'm suggesting to you to begin with is this. I'm very sympathetic and understand the people that take the atheist route, but I see first a major problem in that the very concepts of good and evil dissolve. But secondly, and we'll have to come back to this because I'm going to say this without justification, except it's logically clear that it's true, atheism does not remove the suffering. It's still there. But what it does remove is all hope by definition. There is no ultimate hope in an atheistic universe. So the situation is very bleak. And when I put this to Richard Dawkins, he said, well, because it's bleak, it doesn't mean it's false. And I said, no, but because it's bleak, it doesn't mean it's true either.